Coming up on today's episode of Locked On Bearcats, why Wednesday night's loss reminds me of something that happened on my 8th birthday.
Our Locked On Bearcats, your daily podcast on the Cincinnati Bearcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday. Thank you so much for making Locked On Bearcats your first listen every day. It's free and available everywhere you get your podcasts, including right here on YouTube. Don't forget to subscribe to our Locked On Bearcats YouTube channel and follow it too to get an alert every time that we drop a new episode. Today's episode of Locked On Bearcats is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. I'm Alex Frank, your host, each and every day right here on Locked On Bearcats. We are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, as I said in the cold open, the Bearcats' loss on Wednesday night reminded me of something that happened on my 8th birthday. So, on that day, and this was 2006, the Bengals were playing the then San Diego Chargers. And you may remember this game. I sure do. The Bengals were up 28-7 at halftime. And you're thinking there's no way they're blowing this game, right? Well, sure enough, second half, the Chargers, led by LaDainian Tomlinson, who was the NFL MVP that year, the Chargers scored 42 second half points. They beat the Bengals 49-41. And from that moment on, I was conditioned to think as a Bengals fan to expect them to blow a big lead, a crucial game, etc. And that's much like this Bearcats team. This Bearcats team has dropped 3 straight road games. But it's not that they've dropped 3 straight road games. It's the fact that they've had at least a 13-point lead in each of those 3 games. Not to mention a 16-point lead on Sunday at Wednesday at East Carolina. And all those leads gone. And they lost all 3 games. And on Wednesday night, it's the worst feeling. So I'm sitting at this bar watching the game. And I'm feeling pretty good throughout. Bearcats are up by 16. You're thinking, all right, they're going to coast to an easy win. ECU draws closer. All right, they're playing hard, making things interesting, but they're not going to win the game, right? Then it gets down to a 3-point game. You're thinking, are the Bearcats going to lose this game? They might. But you're thinking, okay, they're going to stop the bleeding, right? Certainly they've learned from their loss against Tulane. Then ECU ties the game. And by now, or they take the lead, and then you're thinking it's not that the Bearcats might lose the game, it's that they are going to lose the game. And that is an incredibly sinking feeling. The Bearcats just simply cannot close out road games. They had a 13-point lead at Houston, lost that game by 6. They had a 13-point lead at Tulane, lost that game by 7 in overtime. Those 2 losses, fine. You lose to Houston, who's number 2 in the country. Okay, I'm not going to hold anything against them there. Especially, that they won their next 2 games and nearly beat Tulane without 2 of their best players. Okay, but then you lose to East Carolina, who's 3-8 in conference play. 3-8 coming into Wednesday night. 12-12. I get it. It was an emotional night for them, honoring their longtime radio voice, Jeff the Voice Charles. But there's no excuse to blow a 16-point lead with 10 minutes to play and let a team in East Carolina out-rebound you 46-27. It's one thing if Temple does, and that is a blip in your season. And the Bearcats, I thought, had gotten better at rebounding since that game. And then this game happens, and it's like they take 1,000 steps back. What in the world are we doing? What on God's green earth is this team doing? It doesn't feel like this team is progressing as the season is going on. You close out last night's game, You get out of there with a win. I don't care if you win by 1 point like they did last year. A win is a win is a win. But the exact opposite happened. 26-9 run. ECU goes on to win the game. Wasn't that? Yeah. 26-9. They outscore you by 26-9 run. It's embarrassing. It is absolutely, it really, whatever the run was, it's just embarrassing. And now, unfortunately, I have come, and maybe you have too, to expect the worst to happen with the Cincinnati Bearcats. And it's come to a point now where we expect that in a regular season game. This team, as Justin Williams has documented over the last 48 or 24 plus hours, is improved. I do believe they are an improved team. Even though last year they only finished 17-14 in the regular season. This team needs one more win to win more games this year than last year. And I do believe they're going to do that. But we're starting to see a late season potential collapse. This team, just less than 2 weeks ago, was sitting 7-4 in American Athletic Conference play. Pretty good. And you're thinking if they can get a win at Tulane, they're certainly going to beat USF and ECU. You'll be 9-5 through 14 games. Well, you've lost 2 of your last 3 games. And you were down at halftime against South Florida. But the point is this. What happened on my 8th birthday is a very similar feeling to what I'm having with the Cincinnati Bearcats right now. And it's come to a point where that is now happening in the regular season. 3 straight times on the road, you're up 13 and you lose. Not to mention up 16 on ECU. It's embarrassing. It is embarrassing what's happening right now. A program that is, or was in 2019 by Matt Norlander of CBS Sports, ranked in his top 10 programs of all time. A program that is a historically really good program, but now can't beat East Carolina in the regular season when they're up 16 points on the road. A team they beat by 28 points at home just over a month ago? That's not progressing through the regular season like this team was supposed to do. That is called regressing. And this team right now, as we sit here, or at the time of this recording, the Cincinnati Bearcats right now currently sit in 5th place at 8-6 in conference play. 8-6. So that means you're going to be in that 5 spot. And now the worry or the concern is, well, they're going to have to play 4 games in 4 days. Hey, you know what? Just going to throw this out there. The Bearcats do drop to 6, and they play, I don't know, Tulane in the first round, or, they play the 11th seed in the first round, which right now is Tulsa, which, I mean, apparently at this point, nothing's given. You beat Tulsa, then you get Tulane, then you would face, I guess, Memphis or UCF or Wichita State. You can still avoid Houston until the championship game if you are the 6th seed. Now, you want to be the 5 seed because then you'll have to play 4 games in 4 days. But, I mean, the road to the conference championship now just got harder and harder. All because you can't beat East Carolina? You can't beat East Carolina. You cannot beat East Carolina? I've got much more on this coming up after I tell you all how this episode of Locked On Bearcats is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. So we're at the midway point of the NBA season, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scorers and threes drained. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thanks again for making Locked On Bearcats your first listen every day. Make sure you check out our brand new podcast, Locked On College Basketball. Everything you need to know about college basketball in one place. Plus, Hear from big-name experts, insiders, coaches, and players. Locked On College Basketball, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. Alex Frank back with you, your host each and every day right here on Locked On Bearcats. There's just so much to take away from this game, but I look at this in the bigger picture, and I just think to myself, we are now conditioned to have this mindset that the Bearcats are going to blow big leads on the road. It doesn't matter who they're playing. It's one thing to fear that going into a marquee game like a Houston or Tulane, but now you're fearing that against ECU. I mean, what's going to happen if the Bearcats are up 13 on Sunday against Central Florida? Do we all of a sudden have to go to our doctors and get tested for triskaidekaphobia? I mean, seriously, do we? I don't think we do. But considering the road that this team is on, where apparently they can't hold a 13-point lead on the road or a 16-point lead, is there a fear of the number 16? I think there is in Cincinnati, given Joe Montana wears number 16. But still, regardless of that, we are just now conditioned to think that, oh, yep, we're up by 13, doesn't matter, we'll find a way to blow it. What does that say about the state of the program? What does that say? It's one thing if it happens once. Okay, fine. If it happens again, little concerning. All right, strike two. When it happens a third time, that's a trend, that's a pattern, and we now have tangible evidence that we can feel this way. And here's the sad thing. It confirms that we are still feeling that way as Bearcats men's basketball fans. And if you think about the program, and I've been a fan of the program my whole life, you're thinking about the program. Since 1992, you've come to expect the other shoe to drop. And at first, this was in the tournament because, yeah, they missed the tournament 5 straight years. 06, 7, 8, 9, 10. But in the years after 1992 where they made the NCAA Tournament, so 13 more years under Huggins, 9 under Cronin, 22 times the Bearcats made the NCAA Tournament. Only 4 times did they make the Sweet 16. Only twice did they go to the Elite 8. More often than not, it was either a first or second round exit. In fact, it was. 18 times the Bearcats lost in either the first or second rounds of the NCAA Tournament. They were a great regular season team. But then, once the postseason rolled around, you either A, feared you were going to go out to the West Coast, B, they were going to draw a tough opponent in the first round, or C, find a way to choke against the lesser opponent in the second round and underachieve once again. And it used to be that only happened in the NCAA Tournament. Ask any longtime Bearcat fan like Mo Egger, or ask Chad Brendel, who's been around the program for a long time. Ask anybody who covered those teams, like Michael Perry or Mike DeCourcy. Ask anyone who covered the team at the time, and they'll tell you. I think that even with the talent that was on some of those teams, like the 2000 team, and no one could have foreseen Kenyon Martin getting hurt. But eventually there came a point, I believe, where you expected the other shoe to drop. Whether it was West Virginia, a buzzer beater beating them in the second round, whether it was Kenyon Martin breaking his leg in 2000 and then losing to Tulsa in the second round, whether it was losing in double overtime to UCLA in 2002 as a number 1 seed, whether it was Nevada in 2018, I was at that game and I can tell you all about it. That's an episode for another day. I mean, it used to be that, you could even put losing to Harvard in 2014. Whatever it was, you expected the other shoe to drop. You could have the most talented team. And the Bearcats had some uberly talented teams since 1992. I mean, they were loaded in 96. They were loaded in 97, 98, 99, and 2000. They were loaded in 2002. They had a great team in 2018, another really good team in 2019. But yet you expected the other shoe to drop at some point. Now, that shoe is dropping in the regular season against teams you should beat. You shouldn't be losing to NKU. You shouldn't lose to East Carolina. The conference losses outside of East Carolina have been reasonable. I shouldn't say reasonable, but they have been okay. That was expected. Even Temple on the road, looking back on it, Okay. They lose to Houston twice. Well, Houston's number 2 in the country. They lose to Memphis at home. I don't think that's a good loss, considering that this program used to be Memphis. But still, there's nothing to sneeze at losing to Memphis. Memphis is a really good team. And we'll see them next Sunday. But losing to East Carolina, we now have to expect the other shoe to drop against East Carolina. This program, once viewed as one of the most consistent regular season programs, less than 5 years ago, is now losing games that are layup games. The next time the Bearcats see East Carolina is going to be a layup game when they're in the Big 12. But then again, ask yourself this. What's a layup game nowadays surrounding the Cincinnati Bearcats? And ask yourself this question. Has there been a cathartic breakthrough since 1992 for the Cincinnati Bearcats men's basketball program? Ever since they went to Kansas City and beat Memphis in 1992. What cathartic breakthrough has this program had? Beating Syracuse in 2012 in the Big East Tournament semifinals. Do you remember they only scored 44 points the next night? Beating Florida State in the 2012 second round. Okay, I'll give them that. They hadn't been in the Sweet 16 in 11 years, and you thought certainly under Mick Cronin they were going to go back again. They never did. What else do you consider a cathartic breakthrough? Winning an American championship in 2018? Well, they should have won the American championship. They were the best team of the conference that year. What else do you consider a cathartic breakthrough? Since 1992. Going to the Elite Eight the next year? Okay. Going to the Sweet 16 in 2001, the year after losing Kenya Martin? Okay. I mean, that was a good season. But my point is this. This program since 1992 has not gotten back to the Final Four. Think about the Bengals. They had their cathartic breakthrough going on their Super Bowl run last year. It wasn't just exercising the Cincinnati sports curse or their playoff drought, which was the epitome of the Cincinnati sports curse. They then beat the number 1 and number 2 seeds on the road in the playoffs, including Patrick Mahomes, who is this generation's best quarterback, potentially. They had their cathartic breakthrough. Bearcats football had their cathartic breakthrough, going to the college football playoff as a group of 5 school. The Reds have not had a breakthrough since 95. You always expect the other shoe to drop with them, and unfortunately now you can expect that with Bearcats men's basketball. Because you are now going into a Power 5 conference, unless something drastically changes over the next 3 weeks. And I don't know at this point if it will. You asked me this question on Tuesday or Wednesday before the Bearcats lost to East Carolina. I would have said, oh yeah, things can still change. I mean, this team can very easily win a conference tournament. You heard Mike Petraglia on this show on Wednesday. He thinks they can if a lot of things go their way, but you can't lose to ECU and have things and expect that things are going to break your way. I'm sorry. I get it. Kansas lost to TCU in 2013. That's the Big 12 and they're Kansas. You're not Kansas. If you can't beat East Carolina when you're up by 16 with 10 minutes to go, and I was listening to Mo Egger's show yesterday on ESPN 1530, and he was talking about, well, is this part of the growing pains or, but there are a lot of people who've been a fan of this program for a long time who may not say that. I don't say that. I don't think this is a growing pain. If this was last year, I can maybe take that side. I'm not taking that side. East Carolina stinks. They were without their best player last night. There is no reason to lose that game. None. You're going to the Big 12, but you can't beat East Carolina? What does that say about you? Because what's going to happen when you're up by 16 in, Iowa State or West Virginia? And they start to come back. One, you're going to expect the other shoe to drop because that's what you're conditioned to think right now in a regular season game. This program has not been back to the Final Four in 31 years almost. And they have not been to the Sweet 16 since 2012, only one time since 2001. They've only been in the Elite Eight twice since 92. And now you can't beat East Carolina. And you still want to tell me that 100% Wes Miller is the right head coach for the job. I'm not saying he's not. But I have my doubts. And again, he can say, or Scott Satterfield can say, you're only as good as your players. If your players can't hold a 16-point lead at ECU, I don't know what to tell you. I really don't. I am going to real quick pour cold water as I switch gears here on a scenario, even though it wouldn't be doom and gloom for the Bearcats in 2023 if it happened. Ben Bryant is this team's starting quarterback. It's not going to happen. I don't care if that is his 6th season coming up, which it is, in college football. I don't care if he's been a starter for 2 years. He is simply not going to fit in Scott Satterfield's system. How do I know that? Because offenses haven't ranked below 32nd in yards per carry in each of the last 9 years under Scott Satterfield. Last year, Louisville was 19th in the country in design quarterback runs and 11th in design quarterback rushing yards. The year before that, 12th and 5th, respectively, in both categories. The Bearcats last year were 59th in yards per carry. For a program that wants to get back to its strength on offense, which is running the football, Satterfield's system, I believe, will get them back to doing just that. How do you do that? With a mobile quarterback. The honor should be bestowed upon Emory Jones or Evan Prater. And for what it's worth, Ben Bryant's only here because, as Russ alluded to on our live room Wednesday, if you missed that, that's in podcast form on Locked On Bearcats. No one wanted a guy coming off a foot injury in Ben Bryant in the transfer portal. Now you add having to be mobile on offense, I just don't see him starting. And I'll touch on that more next week. Coming up, how important is offensive line and wide receiver going to be in the Big 12? We'll get into a little bit of that. We'll get into more next week, but I'll touch on that after we hear from 2 of our sponsors. Offensive line and wide receiver are 2 positions right now that are in major rebuild, that are in flex. If they are in limbo, I should say, they are just really right now, there's a lot of uncertainty. So how important are they going to be in the Big 12? If you look at them statistically, 5 teams from last year ranked in the top 15 sacks allowed in the Big 12. That means they were in the top 50 in fewest sacks allowed. 9 teams in the top 100, and all 3 teams besides Cincinnati going to the Big 12 next year ranked in the top 100, UCF, Houston, BYU. So what does this tell us? Yes, offensive line play is important, but it's not the end-all, be-all to have a good team. Mobile quarterbacks can mask those deficiencies, hence Emory Jones or Evan Prater. Now, wide receiver. One way to look at how important this position is to look at the percentage of yards of teams' total offenses that came from wide receiver. So we look at the Big 12. We see Baylor had 56% come from wide receivers, 56% of their total offensive yards, 58% Kansas, 50.3% Kansas State, who won the Big 12 championship, 57.5% TCU, 56.1% Texas, 57% West Virginia. So that is what, 6 teams, less than 60% of their offensive yards came from wide receivers. It's actually encouraging to me because we don't know who's going to start at wide receiver, and the running back room for Cincinnati is strong. So if the Bearcats can get back to their running ways, hopefully with Scott Satterfield's system and Tom Manning coming over from Iowa State, the collaboration between those 2 guys, they can find a way to get the running game back to where it normally is. Iowa State 70.8%, Oklahoma 62.2%, Oklahoma State 70.4%. That was just a tick under Iowa State for the lead, and Texas Tech 65.5%. So there is some importance to having wide receivers, but it's not the end-all, be-all to what your offense should look like in the Big 12. I think your offense should be balanced. I think there should be some dynamic to it. And the Bearcats are going to struggle to find wide receivers. It's just the way it is. I am not saying that they, can get by with, a lackluster receiving core. What I am saying is, if they are a run-first team, you can win in the Big 12 with that, I believe. Because as we're seeing, 6 teams last year in the Big 12, 40% or more of their yards came from the ground. So what worked for the Bearcats in 2021 and what worked for the Bearcats in years past when they've been good running the football can absolutely still work in the Big 12. More on that next week. Big weekend for UC Athletics. Bearcats baseball getting the show on the road this weekend as they will take on Georgia State. Those 4 games rather, will not be televised. Unfortunately, 40 plus games this season rather, will be televised. Georgia State, they will be Bearcats traveling down to Atlanta to take on the Panthers. Let's see. So interestingly enough, Andy Nagel, he does a fantastic job calling games for ESPN Plus. He'll be calling the game as I'm reading this from Molly Metris on GoBearcats.com. He will be calling the game on YouTube today, coverage beginning at 2:50. So he will be at Georgia State calling the game for the Bearcats at the GSU Baseball Complex. So we have, let me see. So the Bearcats have named their probable starters for 3 of the 4 games this week. Garrett Harker today, Chase Horsch tomorrow, Dylan Broski game 2 tomorrow. Sunday is to be determined. The Bearcats will take on a Georgia State team that finished 30-27 last year, 15-15 in the Sun Belt. All conference players: Max Rayerson, outfielder, 2-way player Cameron Jones. Rayerson was named 3rd-team All-America by Collegiate Baseball and the Sun Belt Newcomer of the Year last year as he led the conference with a school record 22 home runs. This is Georgia State. For the Bearcats, 20 returners, 14 newcomers. Scott Guggens entering his 6th season for the Bearcats. 14 new players, as I mentioned, 8 freshmen, 2 sophomores, 1 junior, 1 senior, 2 graduate students. I mentioned the 6 transfers coming in. 55 games to start the season for the Bearcats. Let's see. We've got 10 position players, 10 pitchers returning from last year. Connor Lynn appeared in 10 games last year with 10 starts, finished with a 4-2 record, led the team in ERA at 4.07, 3rd in starts, 4th innings pitched, and strikeouts. Ryan Nicholson, preseason All-AC selection this year, played in 52 games with 51 starts last year at first base, 2nd on the team in doubles, home runs, slugging percentage, 3rd in RBIs, 5th in hits and runs, and had at least 1 hit in 36 games, 14 multi-hit games. Cole Harding, who hit .313 last year, 2nd on the team in hits and RBIs, 3rd in home runs, tied for 5th in doubles. Bearcats and Georgia State met previously on February 14th of 2020, GSU winning that game in extra innings. By the way, Cameron Jones at Georgia State, 2-time first-team All-Sun Belt honoree, one of 5 finalists for the John Olerud Award as the nation's top 2-way player, led the team in ERA and batting average last year. 3 ERA, even 374 batting average. That's amazing to think about. Bearcats and Georgia State schedule for the weekend. Friday, they will play at 3 o'clock. Saturday, doubleheader starting at 1. Sunday is a noon game. As I mentioned, 40-plus games this season will be televised on ESPN Plus, and it looks like one other game on Flow Sports, and then another game on SEC Network Plus. So lots to look forward to there. Looking forward to that. I will have post-game wrap-ups on all Bearcats, hopefully, for those games. And thank you, as always, making Locked On Bearcats your first listen every day. More importantly, the Bearcats, I shouldn't say more importantly, but big game on Sunday. The Bearcats and UCF on the hardwood. Noon tip from Orlando. That game, by the way, will be televised. Let's see. Of course, you can also hear the game on 700 WLW. That game will be televised on ESPNU Sunday at noon. Big game, of course, for Cincinnati. Much more on that on Monday. Thanks, as always, for making Locked On Bearcats your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out our brand new podcast, Locked On College Basketball Experts Isaac Shade and Andy Patton bring you everything you need to know on and off the court, plus hear from big-name experts, coaches, and players throughout the basketball landscape. Locked On College Basketball, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. I'm on Twitter at Frankie_90 with 2 N's and an ATI. Instagram, AlexFrank9_ and email alex3frank@gmail.com. Thanks as always for making Locked On Bearcats your first listen every day. Happy birthday to Michael Jordan, 60 years old today. Can you believe that? 60 years old. Back on Monday, so much to get to next week. Hope you will join us as always for your first listen every day right here on Locked On Bearcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Alex Frank for Locked On Bearcats. Have a great rest of your day and weekend, and I will talk to you on Monday right here on Locked On Bearcats.